All right, everybody. So today we have Pete Rubish on the show. How you doing, Pete?
Pretty good. How about you?
Doing well, man. It's funny. I've heard your name for a while. So I got into the YouTube space, I guess probably around 2010 or 11, like the YouTube fitness space. And yeah, I've been lifting for even longer than that. But I remember hearing you brought up by Jason Blaha, and he just talked about you as this like incredibly strong guy, high like crazy deadlift. And I found out recently, I think you and I are the same age. So how old are you?
29.
29. Okay, I was 29 as well. I guess I just
Wow.
assumed because again, I'm like 21 or whatever I was at the time. I just assumed you were like 30 because it's not like I saw pictures of you. I just like heard Pete Rubish. So it's funny to think that we're actually the same age.
Yeah, I've been around a while, so it feels like I'm sometimes older than I am, but
Yeah.
I'm one of the veterans now in the powerlifting community, whereas I used to see all the other guys and I'm like, oh, they're so old,
Right,
when I was
exactly.
like one of the young up and comers.
Yeah.
And it's just the cycle of life. Like now I got guys coming up who are a lot stronger and you know in their lower 20s and such, and now I'm like the old guy.
Right, right. Yeah, man. I'm
Kind of
30
funny.
is about 2 months away from me. And I'm like, when the hell did that happen?
I've got about four, so
Okay.
yeah.
So, as we said, we start every podcast here with a donation to the charity of choice of the guest. And you had mentioned the Humane Society. So, I'll have a link down below for anybody who also wants to contribute there. But why did you pick that one?
I have four dogs and I absolutely love dogs. So only one of them is, well, one of them is adopted from a shelter, and then the other few were people had them, and we didn't like pay for them or anything, but we got them, and I absolutely have a connection with animals, especially dogs in particular. Uh,
Awesome.
they warm my heart, my soul.
Yeah, it's hard to not like dogs. I think if you know Scott Stevenson, he's huge on dogs, and I think at least once or twice that he's been on, we've made a donation to an animal shelter. John Meadows, same thing. So yeah, I don't think anybody's gonna not like that one.
Is Scott Stevenson? Are you talking about the chiropractor, or
He is a
because I know
he's not a
chiropractor?
chiropractor. He's big in the space. He's like works out with John Meadows a decent amount, or at least
Okay,
pre-COVID.
so it must be a different guy.
Yeah, different. He does have his acupuncture license. He has a PhD. I think those are like the two main thing. I don't know if he still practices that, but not specifically a chiropractor.
Okay, because there's this giant chiropractor named Scott Stevenson, and he worked on a couple of the bigger name powerlifters.
Gotcha.
I was
Okay.
just
Yeah,
wondering
different
if it
guy.
was the same guy because I've worked with him.
Okay, gotcha, gotcha. So we'll get into this a little bit. Like I said, I've heard of your name for a long time. How did you, just for people who maybe haven't heard of you, I think you kind of, or at least it seemed that you kind of maybe took a break for a little while. I know now you're working on your health, and we'll get into that as well. How did you first get into powerlifting?
Just when I was like 14 years old, my dad had some weights in the basement, and we gradually accumulated more equipment. And I saw him doing that, and I started out like bench and curls like everybody else. And then I started doing deadlifts and squats and all the compound lifts, and I just fell in love with it. So for a while, it kind of like supplemented my athletic performance in school. But then I would always kind of be in season in any given sport, whether it was like basketball or football.
Yeah.
And I couldn't make strength gains. So I kind of got away from those and gravitated towards powerlifting full time. And I've been doing it ever since. So I started
That's awesome.
competing when I was like 17. And like, as I said, I'm about to be 30 this year. So it's been a long ride. And my body feels it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you still lifting? Like I know you had mentioned before, and people don't know, could probably look it up, but I believe your top deadlift was near 900 pounds, squat maybe upper 700s, and bench close to 500. Is that about right for your peak?
Yeah, I did 920 in the gym, but in a
Wow,
competition, I don't count that. I did 871 under competition standards, no straps, calibrated plates. Squat
that's
was
crazy.
772 in knee sleeves, and then that one almost killed me. And then bench was 463, and then I did 485 in training. So
Wow.
all those were under heavy supplementation and such.
Yeah.
But
If you don't mind me asking, when did you get into the super supplements?
I got into anabolic steroids when I was 20 years old.
Okay, so
So
pretty
now
young.
I'm, yeah, it's one of those things. It was honestly more like ego and seeing what other guys were doing,
Sure.
and I just wanted to keep up with them and surpass them because there was a guy in particular, and like we're cool and everything. It's not like that, but he was around the same age, about a year younger than me, and I was deadlifting around 700 pounds, and he just blew past me, like
Yeah.
just blew past me, and I was like, what in the actual heck? I was so upset about it because you're 20, you're like competing with this guy, and so I found out what he was doing, and then I just got in on the same thing, and I wish I hadn't started that young, but that's just hindsight for you.
Yeah, no, man, I think like regardless of how smart somebody is when you're that age, because like, for me, when I was 20 and I had been lifting by that point already like 7 years, I started pretty young and I had a friend who had just started like a year prior. And I remember hitting like a one rep max on my bench that I was pretty proud of. And within like all of a sudden, he did it for 5 reps. And I was like, what the hell just happened? Lo and behold, he started taking stuff. And, I mean, he just looked ridiculous. All of a sudden, he was like so much stronger than the rest of us. But I just remember like specifically that lift hitting it. And then like a week later, he did it for 5. And I was like, what is going on? And I'd worked so hard to get to that point. So I can definitely relate. There's always going to be that competition. And I think once you get closer to 30 and certainly hopefully 40, like you stop having so much ego tied to it, right? You can step back a little bit and realize that like there's other things going on. But at that time, like that's a big part of who I was, and obviously for you, probably even more so.
Yeah, I think that was my identity at the time, 100%. Whereas that's not necessarily the case anymore. I'm able to get more enjoyment out of seeing others do well, like clients and such,
Hmm.
as opposed to myself. So the ego's less of a thing. But in your 20s, you almost had that feeling of invincibility where I was just like, I'll put anything into my body. I don't care. Nothing's gonna happen to me. Or that's what I thought.
Yeah.
I didn't think I was like doing anything negative or damaging. So or I didn't even think of it that way, I should say. It's not that I didn't think it was harmful. I just was like, I'm in my 20s. Who cares?
Right.
So you
Did
throw
you
caution to
get
the wind.
information from somebody in particular, or like was it just kind of like, hey, I'm going to find a source and then just go with it?
Yeah, I knew people, but the stuff was pretty sketchy back then as well. That was the other
Yeah.
thing. Like when you're that young or whatever, you don't know where to go. Like you just get whatever you can find. So if you know some people who have it, you take whatever they're taking, and it could be made in someone's basement, like
Yeah.
completely, uh, under terrible conditions and not healthy at all. And I used to have, um, I'd get huge like I don't even know what to call them, huge swelling welts from where the injection site was, and like yeah, there were times I could barely walk for a week from where I'd. So
Wow.
that's how bad this stuff was, and like I had terrible cystic acne when I first started, and I still have scars from it, but it's a lot better. Just because it was such garbage quality,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
that's another problem. So you just like there were so many issues, but
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I hear some of the things, I'm just like, damn. Like, and then again, like I threw caution to the wind. Like one of the things, like I regretted taking, if you know, like Accutane, it's an acu medication, and later on, like there was actually a huge lawsuit against them. But like, if you're a 16-year-old with acne, you're like, I don't care, just like whatever's going to make me like look better in that situation, or in your situation, whatever's going to make me stronger. I think, and again, maybe we're both smart guys, but it just there's just like an emotional component to all decision making, and especially when you're that age. So I get it, but when I hear some of these people say how like they're getting anabolics, it's just like they don't know anything about the person, they don't know how anything was made. I become kind of a hypochondriac over the years, as I've
me
switched
too.
to more of a focus on health. And I look back where I think about like what other people do, and I'm just like, you just don't care, but it hasn't happened to them, right? In their mind, they're still invincible. So I get it.
Yeah, pretty much. Like I'm definitely a hypochondriac now. I used to be the opposite, but now I'm like paranoid every time I have something go wrong. I think it's like cancer or something. And I'm always
Yeah.
getting labs done like constantly for my own peace of mind, and then just to see how if everything's rebounding as far as my organ health. Because
Yeah.
I wonder now. I'm like, how much damage did I do? And um,
Sure. So
just
what kind of
completely.
scans and blood work have you had done?
I've only had, well, last month I had C-reactive protein, which it was like the lowest possible score. It was like
Oh,
under zero
good.
point 0.3. So
Good.
that was cool because that made me feel better. I don't think you're gonna have cancer if your C-reactive protein is the lowest possible number. There's no inflammation going on. So that made me feel better. And just the typical stuff like a CBC, kidney functions, liver functions, testosterone. nothing too crazy. I had some tumor markers looked at. Um,
Okay.
I'll change it up each month because some things don't make sense testing like every single month, but I
Sure.
like to kind of see my like kidney functions and CBC and all that stuff on a
Did you ever
monthly
have an
basis.
elevated CRP, C-reactive protein?
No, because I literally have only had it tested that one time, which was about 30 days ago. And it
Gotcha.
was I mean, who the heck knows what my blood work looked like over those years when I was abusing anabolics.
Right.
It was probably a disaster. There were a couple times I had some labs done. Um, and cholesterol LDL was obviously, terrible. And hematocrit was through the roof. That was one that was pretty consistent. I always see hematocrit, especially in clients as well, even if they're
Sure.
not on like a ton of stuff, if they're on just even testosterone, and their hematocrit's always like 51, 52. I've
Yeah.
seen 53, 54. Um, it's just always elevated. That's one thing. And whereas my hematocrit now is like 39 and a half. So
Nice.
it's on the other end of the spectrum. Um, but those are the main things. I'm trying to always improve kidney health. That's a big thing. Liver
Yeah.
health.
Have you had decreased GFR values for your kidney health?
The lowest I recall it being, I'm sure when I was on like Trenbolone and stuff, I'm sure it was honestly in the 60s, if I
Okay.
had to guess. But there's also a common theme in powerlifting, and I think in any sport involving anabolics, where you want to bury your head in the sand and you don't want
Sure.
to know how bad it is. You don't want to know the damage you're doing. So most guys aren't getting labs done, and I didn't either. When I was like really pushing the envelope. I didn't want to see the damage I was doing. So we don't look at these things until it's too late or whatever. But yeah, I think my GFR was probably in the 60s at one point, but now it's like 108. So
Nice.
it's gone up a lot.
So just a point of clarification just for the audience. So CRP is, as you mentioned, a measure of inflammation. There's HS-CRP, which can be a little bit more specific, and usually you'll see like lower values. In general, while it is a marker of inflammation, the only thing I would say, and this isn't like to concern you because I wouldn't be overly concerned about cancer in your case, but you definitely can have cancer and have a low CRP. So I just wouldn't want people to think that because, if they're worried about like lung cancer or something, and it's in an early stage, they could have a CRP that's low and still have lung cancer or other cancers. So they're not, totally exclusive of one
Definitive.
another. Right, exactly. That was one thing, but just generally, yeah, there was a guy I knew who was a bodybuilder. I guess he doesn't compete now, and he's probably around 50. And I remember like he stopped working out actually. He hasn't worked out in like 2 years. And he still had a lot of muscle. And he told me he just year round is on testosterone, trenbolone, and I forget there was like one other thing he like would throw in once in a while. But he's literally on like 100+ milligrams of tren just all the time, year round. And I mean, you could tell like, he looks impressive, but I'm just like, dude, you're 50 years old. Like, what are you doing? He said his cholesterol is in the 400s. And he's like, all right, but like I feel good. And that's an extreme level of putting your head in the sand, but people do it, man.
400. So like his total cholesterol is 400 or his LDL.
Yeah. And it's total cholesterol. And I'm
Still,
sure
it's
his
terrible.
LDL is probably in the 300s.
That's insane. I've never seen that high. The highest I've seen LDL is like 230
Yeah.
personally on
I
some of the
actually
blood work.
did an experiment with, if you've heard people probably talking about this like carnivore diet. And I'm somebody who just likes to test a lot of things, get blood work. I've had scores and scores of blood work over the years. And I have some like GI issues. So I just wanted to see kind of like as an elimination diet, start with something like super basic, like meat, and then add back. So I don't recommend the carnivore diet. I don't think I think you can feel better, but it's not because there's anything super special about just eating meat all the time. But in any case, after 1 month of doing it, I did blood work and I did have total cholesterol in the 400s, close to like
Damn.
450. And LDL, I think, was around 330. So it was
Holy
pretty
crap.
crazy. Yeah. Now, again, that was 1 month. I don't think I did any like long term damage in that
It's
time. But yeah, totally nuts, man. Totally nuts.
Do you eat red meat now?
I eat a little bit of red meat, not really on a daily basis. I don't have an issue with it. I know some people, like people who follow like vertical diet by Stan Efferding, it's a lot of red meat. I think it It's probably fine for most people to have some red meat. I just don't eat a ton of it, but I do eat a lot of chicken. That's probably my main protein source. Some egg whites, some protein powder. My, I still personally probably need to bring down saturated fat intake. My LDL is still a little high, and that's something that like I want to bring down a little bit. But I do notice for me, higher healthy fat sources. I have a lot of olive oil, avocado, things like that. Just GI wise, I feel better than if I'm eating like a ton of fibrous carbs all the time. But I have unusual GI issues that most people would not have to deal with. So it's not my recommendation to everybody else.
What's your LDL at currently?
Usually it's around 120.
That's where I'm at, and it's frustrating because I can never seem to get over that hump of like 120, 121, 124. It's always
Yeah.
like right there. HDL is like in the 50s, but I'd like to get a little lower. Um, I don't know. I
You want to get
actually don't.
HDL lower, or you mean you
No,
want to get
I want to get
higher?
LDL.
Yeah.
HDL I'm good with, but I want to
Yeah.
get LDL lower.
Yeah.
HDL right now is like 53, but I honestly don't eat any red meat, and I eat pretty low protein, so
Really? How much protein are you eating?
I don't know for sure, but it's not
Okay.
much. Let me put it that way. I'm probably
Okay.
getting like 100 grams a day.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not. I've tried to. I try not to go overboard with it just for the sake of the kidney functions as well.
Right.
But I eat ground turkey and then I eat some egg yolks and egg whites, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to clean it up a little bit. But what's do you remember what your latest kidney functions were? And
Yeah. I mean, I can pull it up for you. I have literally like
just curious. I'm
100
always
documents.
curious looking at data because
Sure.
the lowest creatinine I've ever seen just from other people was 0.85, but I know people can get lower than that.
Yeah, and to be honest, like, so I mean, this is something that I review with people and clients as well, but it's not something like for me personally I've worried too much about just because I don't have much of a concern over kidney health. Now, if in your situation, I would, based on like your history, and you want to make sure you monitor it, of course. Let me try to find those values for you. Let's see.
Just curiosity.
Yeah, sometimes
I'm
I'll
always
like,
curious with other people's blood work. I'm always
yeah. So, and
fascinated
so
with.
like when it comes to like GFR, those values can range. I mean, literally, I can have two blood works like one week after another, and one I'll have like 100 and one I'll have 80. Like the
Hmm.
day-to-day fluctuations I'm not super concerned about. Obviously, if you are getting like out of range and like less than 60 or something like that, I'd be concerned. Creatinine, my last one was 1.1. Again, it's not something that I get super concerned about. I've been testing it for literally 10 years now. It's always been right around the same. Now, I'm not saying that just because something's in range, it's fine. I do think that some of the ranges are too broad. For instance, like they'll tell you, oh, with CRP, like maybe you want it less than one. But really, I mean, you want CRP low as possible for the most part. And again, if you're sick, if you have some reason for having inflammation, it's not something that I'd like, alarm and everything like that. But in general, there's certain things where either one side or the other is maybe problematic, like too low or too high, even within the range, right? But other ones, like for instance, hematocrit, like you were talking about before, I have to see the exact range, but I believe it goes up to about 51. But
Yep.
even if I was at, if somebody was at 50.5, it's not like I'd say, well, you're in range, don't even worry about it. If, 2 months ago they were at 40, right? And all of a sudden they started taking some anabolics and now they're at 50, to say, oh, well, I'm just in range, so it's still fine, is kind of missing the point, right? Well, if in 2 months, like you have to look at the context there. In 2 months, you went from 40 to 50, that's a problem, even though you're still in range, right? So it's great that people get blood work. It's a big step up from the people who don't get any sort of like scans or blood work or anything. But I still think you have to go a little bit further and make sure you're looking at the total context and not just, hey, this one value on this one date and that one range.
Oh yeah, 100%. I agree with that because the range is kind of skewed. It's like if you're at the bottom end of the range, like for testosterone, they'll be like, "Oh, you're fine," but it's really not optimal at all.
Sure, sure.
Comparing someone with like a 700 test level to someone with like a 300, it's night and day difference. But
Yeah. I do want to make a comment on the protein as well. So it's interesting because the literature on protein intake for kidney health, for the most part, shows that it's not an issue, but the caveat being in healthy individuals, right? And so if somebody has a history of kidney issues, I still don't think it's completely clear what to do in those individuals. I've seen data that's kind of conflicting there, but all of that I've seen up to this point suggests that if you're a healthy individual, normal kidneys, that protein intake up to like, reasonable amounts that we talk about, 1.5 grams per pound, things like that, is generally not an issue. But if somebody's had a, kidney scare or something like that, or a history of anabolics, I'm not so quick to say, don't worry about it. I do think it makes sense to, have scans, have blood work. And I mean, it sounds like you're pretty on top of it.
Yeah, I'm still learning it all. I'm not like 100%, but I still listen to guys like Leo and try to figure some things out. So I
Yeah.
know he's pretty extreme with his ways. So if I say anything
Yeah.
that's wrong, I appreciate you like, I'm not because I'm learning. I'm still learning,
Sure.
guys. I'm like early in this journey of longevity and such. So
Right.
I
Well, no,
don't
I think
know
that's a great
everything,
thing
but
because it's like you're so accomplished in the area of powerlifting, right? And there could be
yeah.
people who, now I won't name. There's a couple that specifically come to mind, but people who like, well, they're so accomplished here, they just assume I'm so strong, I know everything in fitness, health, nutrition. I've got it down, and it's nice almost to see somebody who says, look, like I'm great in this area, still
Yeah,
learning at this area,
I'm still very green here, but
Right.
I know a lot more than I did 6 months ago, but I'm still like, I don't know. There's a lot of guys like yourself who know a lot more than me.
Well,
So
dude, it's a fun process. I mean, it's one of those things. I was just talking to somebody this yesterday. It's like, look, like it's you never want to go through like a health hardship or anything like that, but it can be good if you use it as a learning experience. Like, well, hey, I now know so much more about this. Like even like for me, like right now I'm looking at like, well, I should probably cut this part out because it's where I work now. I'm going to be buying a practice, but I guess I don't want the people I work for now to know I'm going to buy it. But I'll just use it as a general example. But like there's some stuff I'm doing now where it's like, did it go the way that I wanted to go? No, but now like I'm learning so much about like this other aspect of life or like this thing financially or whatever that it's a good learning point. So obviously it'd be great if you never ran into any health issues, but now 35-year-old Pete Rubish is going to be way more knowledgeable, and for your clients who are maybe going through this, you're going to be able to help a lot more people. Can just say, hey, these are the trends I noticed, and you're starting that. So let's stop you before you get up here with these issues. You're here where I was. Let's bring it back down.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, it's always just a learning process in life.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So two other things related to health I want to talk about was one, the testosterone. So I forget where you're at in the process right now, but my understanding was you came off everything. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I came off everything. I ran HMG and HCG for alternating days for 16 days, and then I did Clomid and Nolvadex for about 30 days. I don't know, 30 or 45, somewhere there. I can't even remember right now.
Mhm.
And then I came off everything completely. So my
You did that
testosterone
while
went
you were
at
on cycle.
what's that?
You did the HCG and FSH while you were on cycle.
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
No, I did 9 years straight of taking various anabolics and never ran HCG or FSH or
Oh,
anything
okay, I
like
got you. You
that.
came off, you did that, and then you just dropped everything else.
Yeah, so like when I was getting the idea if I was going to come off, I tapered my testosterone dose down to like 60 milligrams a
Mhm.
week for like the last 3 weeks. And that was the only thing I was on at the time. And then I came off and ran the HMG, which is basically like a form of FSH. And then I did the HCG as well. And then I did Clomid Nolvadex after that for about, like I said, 30, 45 days. And then I came off everything. And I think it was like day 60 since my last shot of testosterone. My total test levels were at 38 nanograms per
Wow.
deciliter. And now they're at like 409. So this is 150 days in.
Okay.
So it's rebounding, but it's starting to slow down. There's still very little LH signaling, and
Okay.
so that's pretty low still. So it's there's definitely some damage that's been done, but I'm trying to hopefully
How did you feel on when you were tapering down to 60 milligrams? I imagine that's maybe a third of what you were using before. How did you feel? How was your strength? Did you still maintain even on that low level, or was it dropping?
yeah, I mean there's it's tricky because when you're on like a full cycle and let's say you're running something like testosterone with trenbolone, That's your peak. That's your peak strength. Like your numbers are at their best. That's when you're hitting the 900-pound deadlifts and such. And then if you're not in that competition preparation phase, you might just be on like testosterone at 250 milligrams a week. And at that point, you might be deadlifting 100 pounds less. You might be
Yeah.
benching 50 pounds less. That's just part of the game. And then on 60 milligrams, I was definitely weaker, but I felt pretty good still. Like I felt
Yeah.
fine. Um,
Yeah, that's like, when I talk to people and clients, it seems to be the experience of many is that, and even like some of the, I don't want to say names, but like some of these retired bodybuilders, like they stay on usually not 60, but 100, 150 milligrams of TRT, and they can still maintain a lot of their size. And people say, well, they're lying about what they're taking, but I believe it. I'm not saying you can maintain peak size, but these bodybuilders who are get up to 300 pounds, they're still seeming to maintain like 260, 270 on TRT levels, which, whereas if they were to drop to be natural, I can't imagine they would be staying nearly that
no,
size.
no, because I was 250 pounds still when I was on like a little bit of testosterone. I
Wow.
don't even remember if it was like 150 or 250, but it was something like that. And I was still 250 pounds. And I looked like I was still, I looked pretty big. And
Nope.
now I'm like 216, 217 on nothing. But I dieted hard. That's part of it. But at the same time, it's like,
So you're leaner now.
yeah, well, not even. That's the
You're
funny
not that
thing.
much leaner.
I'm pretty, this is the sad part, but it shows how powerful things are. I'm probably the same level of body fat I was at
Wow.
250 that I am now at 217
Wow.
because of just muscle loss and such. But um,
I mean,
yeah,
that is what I consistently hear. It's just kind of amazing. Like, so basically, even on TRT, you're talking over 30 pounds of muscle that you're able to maintain that you
yes,
now have lost. And you're still working out, right? You're still
yes,
eating protein. I mean, because I know like Vigorous Steve with who does a lot of with Leo, he just stopped eating. He had some other issues, but he stopped eating. He did like a super long fast, stopped working out, so no protein, anything like that. So his size loss makes sense. But you're talking now 6 months, and you lost 30. It was it 6 months you said?
five.
Five. So 5 months, and 30 plus pounds. I mean that's kind of amazing. But like you said, it underscores how dramatic. Yeah, that's why I hate when people say it's the icing on the
Yes.
cake. It's like, dude, yeah, you have to have other things in place, of course. But if the icing on the cake means another freaking 40 pounds of muscle, sure, it's the icing on the cake. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I've really realized how skewed that mentality is now. Now that I've like done it, I'm like, no, it
Yeah.
makes a massive difference.
Yeah.
Because what we like to do when we're on cycle or whatever, or like when we're doing like a cruise dose, like, well, I'm just on a cruise dose. It's not helping that much. But I'm like,
Yeah.
it makes a mess. I could pull 800 like 40 pounds on a cruise dose, and I like still for 840 pounds. Now I'm like struggling to get back to 700.
Wow.
It's hilarious. It's just like bench, I bench in the fours easy, and now it's like bench is like 330.
Oh,
And it's
nice. We
just
bench the same thing then.
yeah, it's funny though. I'm like, man, no, it makes a pretty big difference, guys.
Yeah.
I always like to say too, I'm like, if you bench 400 pounds naturally, you will be way over 500 on steroids.
Yeah.
Like everything I've seen. If you can get to 400 on nothing, you'll smoke 500 pounds on any anabolics.
I'm just wondering in terms of like limb length and stuff, like how tall are you and do you have longer arms or legs?
Yeah, I do. I have longer arms. Specifically, I'm 6 feet tall.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I mean, because for like you, nowhere near your strength, but deadlift was always my best lift. I'm 6'1".
yep.
I have a 6'4" arm span. So and I have quite long legs as well. Like there's another guy I podcast with, and we're almost the same height, and we measured our legs, and I think my legs had like 3 inches on his, just at the same height. Um, so I have
Wow.
very long legs. My squat was always garbage, but my deadlift was decent, and not surprisingly, given the leverages there.
That's pretty much how I'm. Deadlift always came a lot easier than the other lifts. And
Yeah.
bench has always been like I gotta grind away to get any progress on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we can't understate how much everything helps. Like people love to downplay that. And I've been there before where I've done that, but um, it makes a big difference.
Well, and what the way it happens is because it's very rare that and it sometimes people wait a long time, but most people who have used anabolics, it's not like, hey, I trained for 20 years naturally and
Yes.
then I did it. What happens is they were making progress
Yep.
around year 7 or 8, whatever. It started to slow down. Some people don't even wait that long. So they're still gaining naturally, maybe 5 pounds, whatever. Then they do a beginner cycle, and now they just gain 10 pounds or whatever, right? And then, I mean, some people with a great response gain even more than that, right? But the point is, like, instead of having like the natural trajectory of this, they just keep going and they just assume, well, no, I've just been working my ass off, which many have, right? They're still working hard. I've been working my ass off this whole time. I had better genetics than you. You couldn't do what I do. You don't know how hard I push in the gym. All of these things that some of them are true. And they forget, they don't realize, oh, if I wasn't on these things, I would have plateaued 25 pounds ago. And it's refreshing to hear somebody, with the experience that you do to acknowledge that. And there's another guy, Cornelius Parkin, if you've heard him. I've had him on the podcast as well. He'll say the same thing. He was like, 30, 40 pounds added to his stage weight with like moderate cycles. And so as somebody who is not blasting away, and I know other people like me who find it frustrating when people say like, oh, it's just a little bit of a difference. It's like, dude, it's really not a little bit of a difference.
No, that's a pretty accurate synopsis of like how it is, because that's exactly how it goes. You're making progress still. You might be at that 8 years of training. You don't need them yet, but you're just like, all right, and then you just keep going up in that peak
Yeah.
instead of things tapering off. So that pretty much sums it up exactly how it went for me. Because now it's crazy. I'm almost like, after being on for almost 10 years, it's like I have to relearn how to do this. And I'm almost
Yeah.
like, wow, this is harder than I thought.
Right.
Because you get into this skewed mentality of like, you're always getting help in some way. And
Yeah.
now it's like, oh, you don't have that. So now you really have to figure things out. And it's just, it's a complete eye opener, because I almost forgot what it was like not to have help, which is
Right.
what I think happens to a lot of people.
Yep.
Because a lot of people, even if they don't cycle, they're still going to be on like hormone replacement doses, which is still a significant boost.
Yeah.
And I'm
Definitely.
still very skeptical of a lot of, I don't know. I don't know how much I believe some of the numbers I see naturally put up as well. And I
Yeah.
look at the physiques and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. I know that you can't, the amount of vascularity and the muscle shape and things that I would see when I was on cycle. I see people who, some of the higher end natural people have that same look or
Yeah.
crazy strength levels, and I'm very skeptical.
I think you said
So
before that you feel like, as much as people talk about like fake natties in bodybuilding world, that happens almost just as much in the powerlifting world, right? People are just kind of lying about their status and making it seem like it's just their own hard work or genetics and not discussing that they're on anything.
yeah, definitely. And then the other thing, now we have SARMs, and SARMs,
Mm,
they help tremendously as well, especially like something like Rad 140, and people will take that, and there's just so many ways to like cheat the system that I don't know. I know there's some genetic outliers out there, but I see a lot of the numbers and some numbers naturally surpass the untested numbers. I'm
yeah.
just like, this doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah. Like what if you
I
took
see how
something?
you guys look. I'm like, I used to look like that when I was on, like, when I was full on. So
Hmm.
my genetics may not be as good as yours, but it's still very suspicious to me. I
Yeah.
don't
Sure.
have vascularity at all anymore. Like,
Mm.
I'm lean, but I don't have this vascularity like popping out everywhere. Whereas I used to have that all the time, stuff like that. It's very, I don't know.
Do you know, I'm guessing you probably didn't test it, but any idea what your testosterone levels were at before you jumped on anything, like when you were 20?
Oh yeah, I actually do.
Oh wow.
I did it because I did drug tested meats, a couple
Oh,
of them.
right. Okay.
And well, one of them, after it was right after the meet, so my test was depleted. It was like in the 400s because I'd just
Okay.
done a competition and destroyed myself. But one, I actually, that was pretty accurate. I was 19. I started when I was 20. One I'd done when I was 19, and it was 832
Okay.
total test, free test. I don't, this, the tricky thing with free test, the scale is always different, but the scale went from like 9 to 30 for the normal range, and I was at 33. Um, my
So your
doctor
natural
actually,
free test was already above range.
Yes, this was 19 years old. I specifically, I wish I still had it around, but I remember that 100%. It was 832.
Okay.
Whereas like the highest I ever saw on a cycle was like 3,200.
That's actually not that high
Yeah.
relative to what some people. Now, you were obviously taking things besides testosterone.
Yes.
So it's hard to say, but so on that 3,200, what was your testosterone dose?
I think that was around 750. I never, only one occasion I went crazy with the testosterone dose just to see if it would do anything.
Yeah.
And I always saw a point of diminishing return past 750 milligrams a
Okay.
week. So that was typically where I would, as high as I would go. But I did at one time try like 1,500 going into a meet. And I just didn't see any benefit past certain ranges. Now, the thing from my understanding, every anabolic steroid outside of testosterone will not directly influence your test levels. So if you take trenbolone, it's not going to necessarily raise your test levels. That's what I believe.
Yeah, that's correct. And I remember actually even, again, this is probably a decade ago, so not to like pick on him because I've talked to Jason Blaha offline a little bit, or I guess online, but off air. And I like the guy, but I remember one time on a video, and again, this was super long ago. He said that other anabolics will show up as testosterone in your blood work, and that's not the case. It's not accurate. So unless you have fake gear, right? Somebody says, "Hey, here's
Yeah.
Primo," and they just sold you like test propionate or something like that. Then that's not going to happen. So, what was your total highest dose overall?
Well, this was actually not that long ago. So this was 2019, November. I just kind of said to myself, I was like, all right, I'm going to go all out to try to deadlift 904 in a meet. And I didn't cut weight. I was like 257 pounds. This was the final 2 weeks. So this is typically how it works. It's not like someone plans out a calculated cycle. You just kind of increase the dose as the meet gets closer. So the last 2 weeks, I did 1,500 tests. I did 1,200 milligrams of NPP, nandrolone, and then I did 40 milligrams halotestin, which just about killed me because not literally, but the actual nausea was insane. Like the liver
Wow.
toxicity was through the roof to the point where I would take it, and within 30 minutes of taking it, I felt like I was going to vomit if I would sit up. I would have to lay down on the couch because if I got up at all, I just was like, I'm going to throw up, and I couldn't eat anything, and just very harsh drug. And then I was
Yeah.
also on some Anavar, which
Okay.
I had to take the dose down because the combination of Anavar and Halo was so liver toxic. Just really the Halo
Yeah.
that I couldn't withstand much. That was the highest I ever went with things. I haven't done trenbolone in over 3 years because it makes me like a psychopath.
Really.
Um, Completely alters my brain chemistry. Um, but the highest I went with that was 700 a week. But that was always consistent with volatile relationships and hair trigger temper and paranoia like crazy and just general insecurity, and it's just like a complete basket case on that stuff.
Wow. So it looks like, I mean, if I add that up, that's close to 3,500 milligrams, maybe at like the highest. And so for people who are hearing the doses, when you're talking about a dose, you're talking about a weekly dose, but when you talk about orals, you're talking about a daily dose, right? Um,
Yes.
so yeah, I mean, that's certainly high. I've heard some insane. There was a guy who was on a forum, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years ago now, and he died, but he was on like 10 grams a week, which is just like mind-boggling that somebody
That's
was on.
I can't imagine because I you feel like a pincushion and you feel so
Yeah,
terrible
right.
at even a few grams that I'm like, I don't know how anyone could withstand that much because
Well, he didn't, right? I mean, he died,
yeah, he
so
died. Well, that's a good point.
yeah, it's crazy.
Certain things are much harsher than others too.
Sure,
Like
definitely.
trenbolone and halotestin are just
Yeah.
the whole
Did
league of their
you?
own.
How much did you weigh before you started anabolics?
I got up to 230 naturally.
Okay, so
It wasn't
you
like as
you were
lean, but
okay. So you're probably a leaner 217, and you were maybe a softer 230. So you're maybe
mhm.
around where you got to naturally now. Would you say?
Yes, actually, I'm really close on all fronts. Like I'm right
Strength
around the
wise
same
too, and
strength wise, everything. Like I'm
wow.
basically at that same point. Now the question is, can I get past that point in the
Right.
coming, next year or so? But we'll
Yeah.
see. I'm just realizing it's a lot slower of a process.
Right. Right. So you basically did 9 years of anabolics, got up to these crazy highs. I think it's safe to say, obviously, if you stayed on TRT, you could have maintained a lot of that. And I think
Oh
that's
yeah.
what a lot of these guys do, right? They say, well, and frankly, like I'm not against anabolics. If you're making the choice for the right reasons, whatever your right reasons are, you understand the consequences, I don't care what somebody does. So in theory, blast away 9 years, say, hey, now I'm going to focus on health, stay on TRT. This is what, well, again, I don't want to name names, but we know people who do this. And
Everybody.
what's that? Everybody.
Everybody.
Right. And then they say, now then you have to factor in, well, can you be as healthy at 250? Let's say you stayed on 60 milligrams. I have no question that you could, from a hormonal standpoint, be just as healthy on 80 milligrams of testosterone, 100 milligrams, whatever, as natural levels. There's a little bit of conflicting evidence there, but most evidence shows TRT is relatively safe. But just being 250 might be less healthy. In fact, it probably
Yes.
would be. So
Yes.
yeah, you can find a way to kind of game the system and keep the gains even without blasting. But are you going to be as healthy staying 250 year round compared to maybe a lean 210? I think the evidence would show probably not. There's not a lot of people who are 250 living to be 90 years old. It happens, but not. It's a lot more rare.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because that's what everybody does is they'll still be on like 250 milligrams of test a week and be like, oh, I'm healthy now, I'm in everything, but you can maintain so much on that.
Mhm.
Like you can maintain, you won't be at your peak strength. Like obviously you're not gonna be as strong as you were if you were on like Trenbolone, but
Sure.
you can still be pretty strong and everything. And that was a big motivation for me. Like I wanted to drop my body weight to get rid of sleep apnea because I had it untreated for like 10 years and I just I didn't I wanted to get rid of it as much as I could. So
Yeah.
I knew that being 250 or even 240 was not optimal. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, let me get down to a reasonable weight. And
And that
I
was one
want
of
to
the
compete
things.
at 198.
Oh, okay. Wow. Because that was one of the things we were going to talk about is the sleep apnea. Because I do treat patients with sleep apnea, and I don't know if you have a CPAP already. Do you?
I've had one, but I just never used it.
Okay. Have you had a recent test for your sleep apnea?
No,
No.
my first test I had when I was like 20,
Hmm.
and it was pretty bad at that point even.
Oh wow. Okay.
So I basically the last 10 years went without doing anything about it. And because I just, like I said, it's that whole attitude of, you're in your 20s, you're invincible.
Sure.
Um, but I really wanted to try to do something, productive with it and get my weight down. That was a big, big motivation right there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just being heavier in general, you obviously have a pretty thick neck, and then that's a risk factor itself at the extreme levels there. But it's definitely, as I'm sure you know by now, it correlates with a lot of health issues. So that sleep apnea, if you still do have bad sleep apnea, I mean, that should be up there on priorities, I think, for you.
What are the main risk factors with sleep apnea?
You mean like what
What,
does it cause or what?
yeah, what does it cause?
Okay. So yeah, because if I look actually like risk factors for it,
Or yeah, my bad. No, that's the wrong phrasing.
yeah,
But
but maybe I should go into that too. So risk factors, people who just have a larger tongue, actually sleeping on your back, just in general, because you're talking about a mechanical position of the tongue going back, um, a thick neck itself, and that's why. So I've made a couple of
yep.
videos on neck training. As you can tell, I don't have a particularly thick neck, but I had an even skinnier neck before. So I don't know what yours measures. I'm guessing looking at you, 18 plus. Have you ever measured your neck?
Well, it used to be like close to 20 inches, and
Yeah.
now it's like 17 and a half.
Okay. Um, so mine started at like 15 and now it's like 16 and a quarter. So that's why people say, oh, well, could it cause apnea? But it's like, again, context, right? If somebody has a 20-inch neck, yeah, I probably wouldn't recommend doing more neck training. If somebody's starting with
Yeah.
a 15-inch neck, it's just not, this big concern. But that's another risk factor as well as just weight in general. And there's a genetic component to it. But the gold standard is just to get a test done. I mean, they do have the at-home tests now, which are more accurate than they used to be. But in general, like I've had two tests now, and they both showed like no to mild apnea. But I had all these wires hooked up, and I'm in a facility
Yeah,
doing it, so it's a whole thing. As far as things that it correlates with a lot of issues. Now, again, when you look at, okay, obesity correlates with sleep apnea. Obesity itself correlates with a whole host of health issues, right?
Yes.
So is somebody who just happens to have sleep apnea, but is otherwise in shape and thin, they're just one of those anomalies that has sleep apnea. Are they going to have the same risks as somebody who's 250, 260 with sleep apnea? No, I'm sure they're not. But in general, you do see a correlation with all of these health issues. And like, if you look at like rates of cardiovascular disease, cardiovascular events, there's a significant correlation with sleep apnea. So in general, it is something that I think should be looked at. And if you haven't had a test in a while, and if your insurance covers it, I'd do it. I mean, like I said, the at-home tests are more reliable now than they used to be. So.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't had it done in, like I said, 10 years, but I'd be really curious to see what's going on.
For
I
sure.
don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
But that was one of the
Um,
things, just trying to get lighter.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it really is a factor. I know a lot of people want to think, well, I'm lean, so it doesn't matter. But 250 lean still doesn't mean you're totally healthy.
I know there's a lot of guys pushing 300 all the time, and I just don't know. I mean, that cannot be good for you. Like body weight, period. Even if it's muscle, it's not good to be that heavy. Your body doesn't want to be that heavy.
Sure.
So I've reversed course on that. I'm like, I'd rather be stronger at lighter weight classes
Yeah.
than trying to hit absolute numbers, like
Yeah,
numbers that,
for
so that's
sure.
that's where my goals have changed.
So, well, just one last comment, we'll move on. But I think it's interesting though that like, so after all this time, you like hit these peaks, but now you're really focused on health, which I think is a good priority. You're basically kind of back to where you were naturally, right? Very similar. One could argue, and I think it's a reasonable argument. Well, hey, you'd be here if you never touched anything, but even more so, maybe you could have eked out a little bit more, right? Not a lot, maybe
Oh
if you're
yeah.
training that long, but you could have eked out a little bit more. So all in all, do you regret it, or would you have done it way differently?
Yeah, there's certain aspects I regret, and I would have done it differently. I would have waited like at least 5 years. Um, because I started when I was 20, so I'm not
Yeah,
surely I could have gotten quite a bit stronger than that. And I'm almost having to like go backwards now and redo everything. Um, just from a health standpoint, I think I was just way too reckless. And there's certain things I wouldn't touch, like trenbolone
mm,
and halo testing and some of these anabolics. There's certain anabolics I would have stuck to, like Anavar, Primobolan, and testosterone.
yeah,
But I just didn't care. Like there wasn't lifting was my identity. So it just made it where I was solely focused on that. And it didn't, it's like these bodybuilders, they'll do whatever it takes.
yeah,
That's how it was at the time. It's no longer that way. So yeah, I definitely have regrets about it. And I definitely would have done a lot of things differently with it. Uh, so it's looking back on it, it's like good to have learned those lessons, and it's things I can pass along to others. But um, I definitely have regrets about it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, no, I appreciate you being open about it, dude, because a lot of people aren't. And I think it's important for somebody like your age, right? It's not like you're old. It's not like you're 50 years old saying, "Oh, I wouldn't have done that in my heyday." But you're still in your 20s and you're saying that, right? And it's not also like you've had this horrible health. Like, I mean, you're trying to get back to normal, but I think when people see, oh, well, they had some crazy anomaly, right? And now they're 50 or they had a heart attack or something like that, they think, well, that wouldn't happen to me. But that's not what you're saying, right? You're just a guy who used significant doses, but not the most extreme. You're still in your 20s and you're saying, look, like this caused these issues and I do have regrets about it. And I think that's important because probably most people watching this, that I mean, if I look at like the YouTube stats, there's people from like low teens to 50s, but I think probably most people watching are late teens to 20s. And
Yeah.
those are the people that need to see this message. And if they're really considering it, I don't want to tell them what to do, but my general recommendation is not to do it because when you've had health scares, you've had health scares. I've definitely had health scares. You see, it changes you, and
Yes.
it's hard to relay that unless it's happened to you. But you do what you can.
Yeah. The only thing I'm kind of like happy I didn't do was I never did. Never, not even once, did growth hormone or insulin.
Mm. Yeah,
I'm like, well, thank God I didn't do those. But
yeah. Well, when you look at like people's heart scans, the combination of anabolics with the growth hormone can be pretty detrimental. So have you done heart scans yourself?
I did. I found out from Leo I probably shouldn't have done it, but I did a calcium score
Okay.
like a year ago,
Yeah.
and then I realized like he was like, well, there's really no point to doing it at this age. But the one positive from that, I think it showed my heart was a normal size and my lungs were.
Okay.
So I was like, all right, that's good.
So did they do an echocardiogram at the time?
No,
Okay.
this was my own idea because of what had just happened to Dallas McCarver, and I like
Yeah.
had been around him, and it freaked me out because I used to see the guy every day, so it kind of like hit home because he was 26. We were the same age. Our birthdays are like the same month. He would have
Wow.
been 30 this year in August, at just the same time I would be, and like we trained at the same gym when we were in Kentucky and when we were in Tennessee. We trained at the same gym, so when
Wow.
he passed away, I realized that maybe we're not so invincible. Um, so I got a calcium score done, and then it showed that my heart was not enlarged,
Okay.
fortunately, or anything.
Yeah, it's I think the Dallas McCarver thing definitely woke people up a little bit, because he was so young, and then it was him and Rich Piana were like I think like months apart. So that was definitely like a weird time for sure because they were both huge names.
It was like 4 weeks apart, but
Yeah.
I never thought that could happen to someone in their 20s. I was like, this is. I mean, obviously, he was pushing the envelope to a greater extent, but it's weird. Like I mean, I used to see the guy. I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah.
Like you're 26, man. You're the same age as me. Like that freaked me out pretty good. So that was when it really hit home. Like, hey, maybe this isn't a joke. Like I started changing my ways at that point to an extent, but not as much as I have now. But
Yeah.
that was pretty much when I dropped trend balone
Right. Okay.
because that stuff
Well,
is.
yeah. Well, I have definitely more to talk about, and at some point I want to get into like your training, some of that stuff I think would be interesting. So we can definitely get you back on if you have the time.
Yes, sir.
But I know you got to go in a few minutes. So for people who saw this, for people who want to learn more about you, where can they find your stuff?
I I just have a YouTube channel basically. If you just like search my name on there, you'll
Okay.
find me. Nothing too fancy. I'm not like always on social media. Half my posts are just about food or something. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's I'm more chill now than I used to be.
Cool. Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you taking time. And again, for everybody listening, we will have a link to the Humane Society down below.
Yeah, appreciate it, buddy.